One of the first things that we need to get comfortable with in Photoshop is optimizing images for a web page. So this is kind of the most basic skill that someone needs in Photoshop if they're working to use Photoshop in web design. So we're going to look at the basic idea of some file types that you use for the web and resolution or image size for how big an image is going to show up on your web page. So let's say that we have a web page that looks like this. This is just a basic little web page, and it's got a couple of images here. These images show up really large on the page, so we'd want to use Photoshop to optimize them to make sure that the file size of these images is as small as possible as it can be for how big we're going to use it on this page. That way it'll download more quickly. We want to make sure that images download to a user's computer as quickly as possible, because one thing you may or may not realize about the way images work in a web page is that they have to be downloaded from the web server where they're being hosted to the web visitor's computer before they can actually view them. So one of the things that affects how long it takes for a page to load is the size, the actual file size of an image. So optimizing an image in Photoshop is the process of using file compression to make that file as small as possible so that it'll download really quickly without causing the look of the image to be hurt in the process. We don't want it to look bad as we make it small. So that's one part of the process. The other part of the process is making sure the number of pixels in the image is high enough that the image will be big enough on the screen. If we have a really low number of pixels in the image, we'll get a very pixelated looking image in the end product. So we want to make sure we have the right number of pixels and that we keep those pixels looking good as we squish down the size of this file. So we're going to say, let's say we're going to add a photo into this little bit of text right here. I'm going to put on the home page right here in this area. So we need to find an image and then make some choices about how we're going to optimize that for the size of the file and the number of pixels. So I'm going to pull up a website, a stock photo website called Pexels. There are a bunch of stock photo options out there in the world, both paid and free. And Pexels is a free stock photo option that we have. And I'm going to just search for a nature image. And we'll just try this one right here. I'm going to download that to my computer. See, downloading right down here at the bottom. And then I'll go to Photoshop and open that image from my downloads. So with the lessons in the textbook, the user interface for Photoshop is going to get easier for you to be comfortable in. With this particular lesson, we're not going to do a lot of work within Photoshop using any of the tools over here in the toolbar or anything like that. We're basically going to just kind of check some information about this image and then output it so it'll be best set up for the web. So first thing I'm going to do is see how big this image is. There's a couple places I can look for that in Photoshop. One is down here in the status bar at the bottom. So if I look down here in the bottom left hand corner, there's the status bar, and I can choose different things that Photoshop's going to show me about an image down here. And there's a variety of things. When I'm using Photoshop, I usually use one of these top few up here. And document dimensions is exactly what we're talking about right now in terms of the number of pixels that make up this image. This image is 6,000 pixels wide, 2,848 pixels tall. And you can kind of see that in the menu bar up here at the top too. Pixels across the top, you can see it's 6,000, and pixels across the bottom, 2,848. If you need to change the ruler so that it shows you pixels, you can right click or control click if you're on a Mac in the ruler up here at the top, and it gives you the different units of measurement that you can measure this image with. But for web design, if we're working in the web, we are using pixels as our unit of measurement. So we want to make sure that ruler is set up in pixels. If you don't see the ruler, you can go to the View menu and check Rulers, or use this keyboard shortcut right here, Command R. And personally, I use keyboard shortcuts, so I'd press Command R right here to turn the rulers on and off. You can see. So I've got the rulers, that's showing me the dimensions. I can see the dimensions down here at the bottom. Another thing you can do is go to the Image menu and choose Image Size. And that'll show you the dimensions of the image right there, 6,000 by 2848. And you can resize it here, although for this part of the lesson I'm not going to resize the image in the image size dialog box. I'm going to use a different tool, so I'm going to hit cancel there. You can also look at the document sizes. So when we're looking at an image, there's a couple of different things we're talking about as far as what that image means when we're talking about size. So, and you can see both those right here. Document sizes is the size of the image if you were to download it right now. So this is the actual file size of this image, and right now it's 48.9 megabytes. That's massively huge and would take a long time to download on the computer. You may have noticed that it downloaded fast when I downloaded it in my browser over here. So it didn't take a long time to download there, and that's because it's compressed. When Photoshop opens it up, it takes it back to an uncompressed form. And so uncompressed, this image is 48.9 megabytes. So we need to save this to be very small, less than 1 megabyte, probably like a half of a megabyte. We want it to be super small. So we've got to get it way down from this 48.9 megabyte size. So that's the number of bits and bytes that makes up this image, but the document dimensions is the number of pixels across and down that are making the image. And if I zoom in on this image enough, we can start to see those pixels. You see them outlined in a grid right here. So an image in Photoshop is made up of basically like a piece of construction paper with all the little squares filled in with color. And when those are, it's kind of a mosaic of different colored squares. And as we zoom out and get far enough away, those squares disappear. They get so small that you can't see them, and you see this perfectly smooth image. So this image has 6,000 pixels across. Now, as we're trying to figure out, we're going to put this into our web page here. If I wanted it, let's say, to take up about half of the space of this text right here, I need to figure out how much space that is. So the first thing I'm going to do, just for a demonstration, is I'm going to take a screenshot of my screen, of this web page. And this is a good way to get a feel for how many pixels you need an image to be anyway. If I take a screenshot, I just used the keyboard shortcut on my Mac, Command-Shift-3 on the Mac to take a keyboard shortcut. To take a screenshot. So if I open this image up and look at its pixel dimensions, it's 2,880 pixels wide and 1,800 pixels tall. So between these two images, this one here, the nature scene that I have a picture of, is actually bigger than my monitor. My entire display on my laptop here is only 2,880 pixels across, and this image that I've selected is 6,000 pixels across. And another way that I can see that is if I open the image that I downloaded in my browser. Now, it's fitting in the browser window right now, but you see as I move my cursor, it's a magnifying glass. So this image is actually being scaled down so it'll fit on the screen. And if I click with the plus sign there, it'll go to full size. So at its full size, this image is much bigger than my display. So if I want it to be half the size of this text, I have an image that is much larger than that. I'll open it back up. It's much bigger. And so what's going on with that is that in a web browser, an image is displayed with 1 pixel of the image being displayed by 1 pixel on your monitor. So your monitor is made up of a bunch of little squares too. It's essentially another piece of construction paper, except instead of filling in each square with a color, we've got a little light for each square that can show any color. And so when we place an image in a web page, we are showing the image on our display by making 1 pixel in our image match up with 1 pixel on the screen. So we need to change the number of pixels in this image so that it'll fit more reasonably on the screen. And so another way to kind of see how much space, let's say I'm wanting it to fit in about right here, take up about this much space. Well, I'm using the screenshot tool again on my Mac. This time I'm pressing Command-Shift-4, and that gives me this crosshair. And if I click and drag, it'll take a picture of just one section. But I can look and see at the cursor there that it's about 450, about 250 pixels that makes up that little space where I want this picture to be. So I need something much smaller than 6,000 pixels wide. I need something closer to 450 pixels wide. As you work in Photoshop and build web pages, you start to get a feel for about how many pixels across or tall something needs to be to take up the amount of space on the screen that you want it to take up. So this tool of using some sort of measurement tool is one way to get a feel for that. But also, if you just do some optimizing like we're doing in this lesson, you'll start to get a feel, well, that's too big, that's too small, and you'll start to get a handle on these numbers that you need to know for how to get an image to fit. So if I go back over to this image, I need it to be much smaller than it is, and also in terms of pixels, but I also need it to be much smaller in terms of megabytes, the file size. So first thing we're going to look at here is a tool in Photoshop that is an image optimizer, and it's been around for a long time. It's kind of an old tool at this point, but it really is good at helping you see how can I change the size of this image both in the number of megabytes it is and in the number of pixels it is. So this is under the File menu, and then it's under Export, Save for Web Legacy. So what we're doing here is we're taking a basic image in Photoshop that we're not making any changes to, but we're trying to change its physical size in pixels and its file size in megabytes. And Save for Web Legacy under the Export menu and under File is the place to do that. So when I bring open that Save for Web dialog box, it kind of opens a separate program in Photoshop. It's like a whole new little piece of software. And when I look around in there, I've got some options up here at the top: original, optimized, 2 up, 4 up. And for this image, I'm just going to put it in 4 up so I can show you a few things about exactly what's going on with this image. Over here on the right hand side, I have some information about how this file is going to be exported. So I've got some presets at the top, some file settings, some color mode control, and some image size control. And there you see our image size is 6,000 by 2848. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the number of pixels in this image. And remember, we're starting at 6,000. But when I check my space over here, it was something more along the lines of 450 that was going to be a more reasonable size. So I'm going to change the width of this image to 450. Now, first thing to notice is nothing seems to be happening with my image. Up here's my image. It hasn't changed. When you enter a number into this area in Photoshop, you have to actually enter it somehow. I'm going to click into the next box. And now it's seeing it as being red as my changing the image size. And so it's going to resize it. Now, One thing you got to notice about this is that here is the size that I told this to be, and here is the size that it's showing up over here in my browser. And the reason that this is happening is that I have a Macintosh which has a Retina display, and a Retina display has about twice the resolution of a normal computer display. So it has twice as many pixels in each inch of the display as a typical monitor. It's a high resolution computer display. So it actually has needs twice as many pixels here to make that space in the image. So I'm going to ignore that for now and prepare an image for a general display. And we'll talk about preparing for Retina displays and basic displays later on as we get into more kind of advanced image prep. So right now I'm just going to use the number I got, 450, and that's going to be my image size there. I'm going to click this little plus sign down here just to enlarge that image a little bit so we can see what's going on. So this allows us to really scale the image down, and you can tell that because in the original image back here, actually before I resized it, in this area down here it showed the 43 megabyte size, but now just by changing the size down to 450 pixels, I can see that the size has gone all the way down to 282K. So it went from it's a huge decrease in size. This is about 1/4 of 1 megabyte, and it was over 40 megabytes before. So it's taken an enormous file size decrease just by changing its resolution amount here. So one of the things that we don't want to do as we're prepping images for the web is we don't want to have a bigger image than necessary in terms of the number of pixels, because that will make the file size bigger, which will make it take longer to load on someone's computer, make the web page longer to load. So we've really taken care of a lot of what we needed to get done just by doing that. But the other thing that you can see as you look at these images, and I'll zoom one more time, is here's the original image, and as you look at these different optimized versions in the 4 up right here, you can see that their quality is really different. So as I zoom in, I'm starting to get this image is starting to look jagged. This is the original, but because we've made it so small, 450 pixels, I can start to actually see the pixels that are making up the image. This is not what it's going to look like on the computer screen in the web browser because I've zoomed in, and the image won't be zoomed in the web browser. But we can use this Save for Web dialog here to compare how different forms of compression on this image will cause the image quality to go down. And we want to make sure when we save the image that we're keeping the image quality as high as we can. So here's my original, and then I have 3 different JPEG compressed images. JPEG, as you're surely familiar with, is a file type, and it's completely there so that we can shrink images down to a smaller size by kind of throwing away some of the image quality that it doesn't think it needs. And in the process of throwing away some of that image data, the quality of the image gets compromised. So we have a JPEG here with its quality set to 30. We have one here with the quality set to 15. And we have one here with the quality set to 7. And as you look at these compared to the original, you can see, like especially up here in the sky, you can see some weird pixels. These are called JPEG artifacts showing up in the image along that ridge. Not here at all. When I look down here at the 15 quality, I can see those, but I can also see some kind of squares starting to show up that are just all over the image. It's getting divided into a bunch of squares. It's not here, and it's not very noticeable here. It's actually happening here, but it's not nearly as noticeable as it is here. And then in the 7 quality, it's even worse. The artifacts up here on the skyline are really bad, and then all of this squares in here are much clearer. So we want to use the Save for Web dialog box so that we can look and see how is this compression that I'm putting on my image changing the visual quality of the image, and we want to make a decision where we get a nice small file size without tearing up the quality of the image very badly. The other information that we get inside the little preview here, in addition to the quality and the file type, is we get the file size right here. So at 30 quality, the file size is 12.98K, which is again much smaller than even the smaller version of the file. At 15 quality, it's 8.5K, and at 7 quality, it's 7.4. So the file size is getting much smaller as the quality goes down, but the image quality is getting bad. And then the other thing is we get an estimate for how long it would take for this image to load for someone on different internet connection speeds. So if they've got a slow connection, this would take about 15 seconds. If they have a kind of a typical higher speed connection, maybe 3 seconds. Say 256K, take about 1 second to load. So you can look at different kind of estimated internet speeds and how long the images would take to download at these different quality levels there. So that helps you get a feel for how long your web page will take to load. If you had 10 of these images, that would take about 20 seconds for those images to load all together as you're waiting for the page to fully load up. So in each one of these boxes, what I can do is I can change the compression settings and compare the images. And over here, under this preset drop-down, there's some different drop-downs for the most common image file types that we compress images with in Photoshop. So for instance, I have a bunch of JIFF presets. Some people call it GIF, other people call it JIFF. It stands for graphic image file format or graphic image format. Now we have the GIFs, JPEGs, and PNGs. And these are the three most common file types for web images. So as you're using Photoshop to prepare an image to go onto a web page, you're ultimately going to put it into one of these file types. These are all compression file formats. They all throw away image data to make the image smaller so it'll go quicker over the web, but they all will damage an image. So you don't want to use any of these as regular file storage file types in Photoshop. You want to only use them when you export for the web. So I'm going to set one of these little preview windows over here to use JIFF, one of them to use JPEG, and I'll use high. These are just quality levels. I'm going to use a high quality JPEG compression. And then I'm going to use ping. And we have two different kinds of ping, and I'll talk about the difference between those. I'm going to use ping 24 for right now. And so now I can see how these three different image compression formats change the look of this image. JIFF is a really interesting compression technique that really narrows down the number of colors that are used in the image so that it can make the file size smaller. But you can see the number of colors it's using right here in this color table. As it does that, though, it causes the image to lose a lot of detail where the number of colors is being reduced. So like if you look at the mountains in the original image, there's kind of a gradual change of colors right there. But over here in my JIFF, they get banded into these bands of color. So that's a definite negative effect of the JIFF file compression on this particular image. Same thing in the sky up here. That's called banding. And so JIFF is usually not the best file format to choose for a photograph. It is a better file format to choose for graphics like a logo or something like that. So we're probably not going to choose JIFF at all, but we could make the JIFF look a little bit better using some of these settings over here. For instance, I can change the number of colors in the image, and that reduces the banding. So if I use 16, for instance, it looks really bad. The image size is 15.6K, so it's a small image, but it looks pretty bad. If I use 32, now I'm 23 instead of 15 on the size, but the image looks better. But if I compare the JIFF with 32 colors to the JPEG at high quality, a high quality JPEG is about 24K, and the JIFF has the banding, so it looks really bad, whereas the JPEG at high quality doesn't, so it looks a little better. So I could say, well, for the file size, I'll probably just use the JPEG, because this JIFF doesn't look very good. Another thing I can do with the JIFF settings to try to get it to look better is to set dithering, to turn on dithering. And dithering is something that's used to get rid of the banding. So over here where I can see kind of a lot of different banding in the mountain and a lot of banding in the sky, if I turn on the dither and give it a dither amount that's not 0, as I drag that slider, you see that the pixels start breaking up. And it still looks pretty bad because I've got all these pixels kind of very obvious in there. It looks like an old video game graphic or something, Contra, but it's breaking up the banding, so the banding doesn't look as bad. And I have a few different options for how the dithering will appear: diffusion, pattern, and noise. So those are just different ways that the pixels get thrown in there to break up that banding. So you can use the dither for that. And in the presets, when you look at the presets, you have a number 128 and then the word dithered or no dither. So that's whether this dithering is turned on or not. So we could try those things, but even then, by using at 32 colors, by using the dithering, my file size went from 24 to 30. So my file size is just getting bigger, and it still doesn't look great. If I go up to 64 colors, it looks a little better, but now I'm up to 40. So I can kind of pretty objectively say that this JIFF compression is giving me poor image quality. The image does not look good, and the file size, it's not even better. So I'm probably not going to use the JIFF file format for this image. If I look at the ping right below it, the ping actually looks great. The ping looks really good. Here's the original image, and here's the ping. Comparing that to the JPEG over here, I don't see any of these artifacts. So ping is really a much sharper compression format. It has two different settings. It has the 24 or the 8. And if I use 8, the ping works basically exactly like the JIFF did. It has a number of colors. It has this dithering option. So I could use ping for the compression setting, but if I use ping 8, I run into the same problems that I had with the JIFF. It's about the same. I'm probably not going to use that. If I use ping 24, the image quality looks great, but the compression amount on the file size is not as much. So in my original image, I'm at 282. In the ping 24 compression image, I'm at 144. That's still a decrease in size, so that's good. But look how much longer this image, the ping 24, will take to load than the JPEG at high quality over here. Ping takes 12 seconds to load. The JPEG takes 3. So if I had 10 of these on my page, somebody would have to wait 120 seconds, 2 full minutes for all those images to load, whereas only 30 seconds, 10 times 3, 30 seconds for JPEGs to load. So even though ping is really good in terms of its image quality, its compression is not quite as much. So I'm going to switch over now to the JPEG. And in the JPEG, I have some quality options here: high, very high, maximum. They just are changed to presets numbers on this quality slider. So if I set maximum, now it's at 100, very high, 80, high, 60. So all I'm doing by choosing these keywords is changing the number on the slider. And at 100%, this image looks very good. It looks pretty much just as good as the ping did. But look at the size. JPEG at 100% quality is 82, and the ping at its kind of 100% quality, and the ping 24 It's 143. So JPEG on this image is definitely giving me a smaller file size. But 82 is still kind of big because it takes 7 seconds to download at this 128K download speed. So I want to kind of make sure that I'm getting this as small as I can. So if I try very high, that still looks pretty good. In fact, what I'll do is I'm going to do 2 up, and I'm going to do a JPEG high on the top one, and JPEG medium on the bottom one. So if I compare these two, I can see all that artifacts on both. Let me take the medium. I'm going to say that this 30 quality is too low, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to go over here and choose very high. So now I'm comparing high to very high, and look at how much the artifacts go away. So that you can very kind of clearly see how much the visual change is happening in the image as you're making these decisions. We're looking at these with the images zoomed in to 600%, which is bigger than they're going to show up on the actual screen. So I'm going to zoom out to something where we can still see it, but where it's closer to what it'll actually look like on someone's screen that views this image. And this is about the size it'll show up on someone's screen. So at this size, I am having a very hard time seeing the differences between these two images at all. So I'm going to take the very high. I don't think I need it that high because high and very high look about the same. I'm going to go back to medium on this. And at medium, I can start to see the little weird artifacts right above the ridge of the mountain right there. So 30 quality doesn't look very good. High quality actually looks pretty good. You have to look really close to see any of the artifacts in there. So I'm liking that. JPEG high quality. I'm at 450 pixels across, and I've got the image at the point where it will be 24K and download in 3 seconds if you're on 128 kilobaud per second, which is a decent speed. Something good to kind of test against. So if this is the one I want, you can see as I click on these, it's highlighting the window. I'm going to highlight the one that I like. Click Save. And I'll just call this Nature. Save it here on my desktop so I can find it. And so now I've got the image, this image optimized for the web. So if I go back over here, and I'll make a new tab and open that one up off the desktop. Here was my original image, but my new image is much smaller, both in the file size, the number of megabytes or kilobytes that make up the file, and also in the number of pixels across and down that make up the image. So now I've got something much more kind of prepared to insert into this document here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's see what happens. I'll upload it into my images folder in my hosting here. And then in my home page HTML, I think, let's see, it's going to be right there next to that lorem ipsum, so let's go ahead and stick it in here. And let's see if that worked. There's the image. I'm going to set it to float so that it will sit over here to the right. So I'm going to make a little bit of a change there. In this case, I'll just use some inline CSS for an example. So, right. And if I were wanting this to look right, I'd also put a margin on the left-hand side, so I'll do that real quick. Alright, so now I've added this image to the page. I've got it at a good size. It's going to download really quickly, and the compression that I used is not hurting the image quality very much. That's the process that you want to use as you prepare images for your web pages. You want to make sure that you're using them at the correct size. And what you definitely don't want to do is just download an image like this without evaluating it for its file size and its pixel dimensions and insert it right into your page. That would be a very bad idea. Even if I took this original image, if I just go save as, let's say, I say, well, I want to use I'll just do a JPEG, and then I just say, let's say, I'll just call this JPEG.jpg. So I'm just doing a regular save as. Here, okay, maximum, that sounds fine, whatever. Click OK. When I look at that image here, it's 5.4 megabytes big. That is much, much bigger than my optimized version, which is only 26K. It's massively smaller, my nature file. So you don't want to just take an image, save as. You need to make sure you optimize it. Make sure you check the file size versus the image quality. You want to try those different compression tools, see which one is the best, and get an image that will load really quickly and be the right size in your page before you insert it into that page. That's lesson number one for kind of the most important skill. If you don't know anything else in Photoshop as a web designer, the real most important skill is to make sure you can optimize an image for quick download and correct display in the page. And we'll talk about a lot more as we go along in terms of some of those other file techniques or file formats over here, because there's some other things you can do with JIFF and with ping. But for photography, JPEG is usually your best choice just for photographic images. But there are some advanced things we can do in both the JIFF and the ping that you can't do in JPEG. So we're going to learn more about the Save for Web dialog box right here, and we're going to learn more about these file formats. But for now, the important thing is learning how to optimize an image for both its pixel resolution and for its file size. So if you have questions about either one of those things, you can post your questions in the general questions section of Blackboard, and I'll get to those and answer them. I'm going to give you an assignment this week for some image optimization like this, so we make sure that you understand how that tool works in Photoshop, and we'll also do another lesson from the textbook to continue your familiarity with the software in general. Have a good week. Let me know if you have any questions.